Hello, welcome to Crossfire, the show that dives into the heart of global conflicts, where nations collide, alliances shift, and lives hang in the balance. On tonight's show, we tell you how a rebellious act by a teenager 13 years ago ignited a revolution in Syria, turning years of frustration into a movement that challenged Bashar al-Assad's decades-long grip on power. Also, the show we tell you how US President-elect Donald Trump is calling on China to help mediate a ceasefire deal between Russia and Ukraine. Stay tuned as we break down these critical developments and explore their impact on the future of global power and security. A simple act of rebellion, a teenager, a spray can, and a daring message sprayed on a wall. That moment in 2011 sparked a firestorm in Syria, transforming frustration into revolution and challenging a dictator's decades-long rule. Today, the fallout of Muawiyah Syashne's graffiti is still felt as Bashar al-Assad's regime has been crushed. But how did one boy's defiance ignite one of the deadliest conflicts of our times? And what lies ahead for a nation battered by war? Our next report tells you more.
It was a simple act of rebellion. A teenager, a spray can, and a wall. But what happened next would change the course of history, leaving a nation in ruins and a dictator fighting for survival. This is the story of Muawiyah Syashne, a 14-year-old whose graffiti lit the fuse of the Syrian civil war. A conflict that has now come full circle as Bashar al-Assad's grip on power has been crushed. But how did a teenager spark a revolution? And where does Syria stand today? Let's take you back to 2011 to the dusty streets of Daraa in southern Syria. Muawiyah Syashne and his friends were like any other teenagers. Curious, mischievous, frustrated with the world around them. But Syria wasn't just any place. It was a nation ruled with an iron fist, where dissent was dangerous and silence was survival. Armed with nothing but a spray can, Muawiyah sprayed a message on a school wall. The message was a warning which read, "Ija kal dur ya doctor," which means, "It's your turn, doctor." The doctor in the message was President Bashar al-Assad, whose background as an ophthalmologist had earned him the nickname. The graffiti wasn't just a jab. It was a spark of defiance against a regime that had held Syria in a chokehold for decades. What happened next was brutal. Muawiyah and his friends were arrested by Syria's secret police, the notorious Mukhabarat. For 26 days, they were held in captivity, tortured and humiliated. When their parents and neighbors demanded their release, the regime responded with violence, tear gas, bullets, and bloodshed. But instead of silencing the people, the regime's actions ignited something unstoppable. On March 15, 2011, Syria organized its first day of rage. Inspired by the Arab Spring that had toppled dictators in Tunisia and Egypt, Syrians from all walks of life took to the streets, demanding freedom, justice, and the downfall of the Assad regime. But the regime responded the only way it knew, with more violence. Non-violent protesters were met with gunfire, and as the death toll rose, so did the resolve of the Syrian people. What began as a grassroots uprising soon escalated into an armed rebellion. By July 2011, defectors from Assad's own military formed the Free Syrian Army, or the FSA. The opposition splintered, creating a vacuum that extremist groups like Jabhat al-Nusra and ISIS were quick to fill. 12 years later, the scars of that fateful graffiti still linger. Over 500,000 Syrians are dead, and more than 13 million have been displaced. Entire cities lie in ruins. Symbols of a war that started with the hopes of freedom and spiraled into one of the worst humanitarian crises of our time. And now, history is repeating itself. Rebel forces led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham or the HTS, have taken control of major cities, including the Syrian capital Damascus. Assad, once the unshakable ruler of Syria, has taken refuge in Russia. From a teenager's graffiti to the fall of a dictator, Syria's story is a chilling reminder of the power of defiance and the devastating cost of repression. As the dust settles on this new chapter, one question remains. What does the future hold for Syria? For now, all we can do is watch as history unfolds in a nation that dared to demand its freedom.
With Bashar al-Assad's regime toppled and opposition forces seizing control of Syria, Israel has stepped in, claiming a strategic buffer zone in the Golan Heights. The region, which was once a neutral ground, is now a flashpoint of tension. This comes as Israeli forces warn nearby Syrian villages to stay put while carrying out airstrikes on weapons depots. But as the new battle lines are being drawn, could this spark a broader conflict in the region? Our next report decodes this for you.
The chaos of Syria's fractured landscape, a bold and controversial move has emerged. Israel has seized a strategic buffer zone in the Golan Heights, marking a turning point in one of the world's most volatile regions. With Bashar al-Assad's regime completely crushed, opposition forces have taken control, and jubilant crowds wave revolutionary flags in Damascus. But amidst this upheaval, Israel's actions have triggered new fears and questions about the region's future. After more than a decade of civil war, Bashar al-Assad's regime has fallen. The opposition, led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, has taken control of key regions, including the capital Damascus. And now, in a move that's sending shockwaves across the globe, Israel has seized territory in the Golan Heights. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced the operation, citing a security vacuum created by the collapse of the 1974 ceasefire agreement. The Israeli forces have now occupied a buffer zone that once separated Syria and Israeli-controlled areas of the Golan Heights. Netanyahu justified the move by saying, "We will not allow any hostile force to establish itself on our border." The buffer zone, once a no-man's land, has become the largest flashpoint in the region. But let's not forget the history here. Israel captured part of the Golan Heights during the 1967 Six-Day War and annexed it in 1981, a move recognized only by the United States. To the rest of the world, this remains Syrian territory, but this is more than just a land grab. It's a strategic maneuver in a deeply unstable region. The Israeli military has issued urgent warning to 5 Syrian villages near the Golan Heights, telling the residents to stay home. This has left communities on edge, fearing what could come next. Meanwhile, Israel's Air Force has launched targeted strikes on weapon depots in southern Syria and Damascus. According to Israeli officials, these operations aim to prevent advanced weaponry from falling into the hands of extremist groups or Iran-backed militias. For years, Israel has been wary of the growing influence of Iran and Hezbollah in Syria. Netanyahu called this moment a historic day, highlighting Israel's recent success in weakening Iran-backed forces during the war in Lebanon. But there's another layer to this story. By occupying the buffer zone, Israel risks further inflaming tensions with Syria's new rulers and its regional neighbors. As Syria grapples with the fallout of Assad's downfall, the humanitarian crisis remains staggering. Over 500,000 Syrians are dead, and more than 13 million have been displaced since the civil war began. Now, with Israel asserting its control in the Golan, the question looms: where does Syria go from here?
From the fall of Bashar al-Assad to the war-torn streets of Ukraine, dramatic shifts are shaping the balance of power. And leading the call for peace is US President-elect Donald Trump. In a bold and surprising move, Trump has urged Russian President Vladimir Putin to end the war in Ukraine, pushing for a ceasefire and peace talks with China as mediator. So now the question is, can China truly bridge these global divides? And will Putin embrace this opportunity for peace? For more on this, listen in to our next report.
Dramatic shifts in Syria and Ukraine are reshaping the global landscape. US President-elect Donald Trump has urged Russian President Vladimir Putin to end the conflict with Ukraine, pushing for a ceasefire and immediate negotiations. But Trump's message didn't just focus on Ukraine. He tied it directly to a seismic shift unfolding in West Asia, where the 24-year-old rule of Bashar al-Assad stands crushed in Syria. So, is this the moment for a dramatic shift in global power dynamics? Trump says it is, calling on China to help broker peace and warning the world that the stakes have never been higher. Taking to his Truth Social account, Trump says Syria's collapse is a direct result of Russia's failure in Ukraine. Trump points out that Russia's military, once a formidable force in Syria, is now stretched thin. He also says close to 600,000 Russian soldiers wounded or dead in the war against Ukraine. But Trump doesn't stop there. He suggests that the war in Ukraine, now in its second year, is at a breaking point. Trump, who once claimed to have special relationship with Putin, says this is Putin's time to act. His solution? A ceasefire, immediate peace talks, and China's involvement to help mediate. The world, according to Trump, is waiting for the moment of peace. Trump's statement highlights the interconnected nature of global geopolitics. The war in Ukraine has not only drained Russia's resources, but has shifted its priorities. The loss of influence in Syria, which was once a key area of Russian power, could very well influence Putin's decision in Ukraine. But the challenge here is the human cost. Hundreds of thousands of lives lost, entire nations destabilized. A ceasefire is more than just a political win for Russia or Ukraine. It's a necessary step to prevent a global catastrophe. Now, Trump's suggestion that China could play a pivotal role in bringing both sides to the table is one that has raised eyebrows. China, with its growing global influence, might just have the leverage to broker a peace deal. But can China really bridge the deep divides between Russia and Ukraine? Trump seems to think it's possible. But history has shown us that peace negotiations in such complex conflicts rarely come easy. With tensions running high on multiple fronts, the question remains, will Putin seize the opportunity for peace, or will the conflict spiral further into chaos? And how much influence will China truly have in this complex global chess game?
That's all we have for you in this edition of Crossfire. See you again tomorrow.